Stay more comfortable, more concealed, and in the stand longer with Osseo gear. Premium camouflage apparel created for bow hunters by bow hunters. Osseo's revolutionary patented camo patterns and innovative features are designed to keep whitetail bow hunters totally invisible and dead quiet. Elevate your game with Osseo. Visit asiogear.com and take 20% off your purchase with code TRUTH20. Hey folks, I want to take a minute to give you a heads up about Tethered's latest gear. If you're serious about staying mobile in the woods, you've got to check this stuff out. Now, I've been using their Ultra Lock saddle, and now the SD saddle is available. And let me tell you, this thing is dialed. It's ultra light, super adjustable, and most importantly, it's comfortable. You're not going to be shifting around up in the tree wondering if your legs are going to fall asleep. Pair that with the Predator V platform, which is stable, lightweight, and has an angled front edge for comfort. This thing will give you plenty of room for those critical moments when you need to make a move on a deer. And if you're like me and you spend long hours in the tree, you'll appreciate the new Predator CFX platform. Carbon fiber construction that keeps it light, but tough enough to handle whatever you throw at it. This is the kind of gear that makes a difference when you're out there all day. And listen, if you're always juggling your gear like I am, Tethered's got you covered with the Universal Platform Pack. More rigid to make getting your platform in and out easier, and 2 sizes to fit the smaller and larger platforms. Whether you're hunting public land or heading to your favorite spot on the back 40, this setup makes carrying your platform so much easier. So if you're serious about getting in the game this season and hunting smarter, check out Tethered at tethered.com. Their gear will keep you lighter, quieter, and up in a tree longer, which, as we all know, is where the magic happens. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today I got on my good buddy. You know him, you love him. He's a second-time offender. We won't hold it against him. Mr. Jacob Sklenar. What's going on, buddy?
Not much, man. Just beginning of a little rutcation here, November 4th.
Nice.
Getting excited to get after it really, really hard here.
Nice. You got some time off that you taking a nice chunk?
Yeah. First time I'm actually taking a chunk off to hunt in-state. But yeah, I'm excited to get after it. I've had just such a great season from like a perspective of the quality of deer that I've gotten on. I mean, I think there's probably 6 encounters with bucks that I would have shot last year or any other year. Passed on quite a few, like 130s pluses, and it's been a really, really, really successful season from that standpoint, but not quite what I'm aiming for right now, so it's kind of bittersweet.
Yeah, I hear you, man. There was, I guess, 2 deer that I've seen that any other year I would shoot. You know, and like you and I are in a similar boat where we have certain goals for this year, you know, and the 2 deer that I had seen so far this year that, you know, just aren't on that list of goals, you know, and it's one of those things where I'm like, man, I hope I'm not kicking myself like come January, you know what I mean? Because one of them was like a deer that was like, man, you got no business like not trying to shoot that deer, you know. It was one of those types of situations. But you know, it's like that old saying, man, it's, you know, you can't reach your goals if you're willing to kind of settle for the intermediary kind of steps, if you will, you know, so that, and I had a great season last year. So, I'm willing to kind of take one on the chin this year if I have to learn and get better, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That's the beauty of it too is, wow, crazy voice crack there, but that's the beauty of it too is you don't punch that tag. You still had the experience. You still did the work to get there, and now you get to keep hunting. So that's what I keep telling myself. Like when I get those deer at really close range. I mean, there's been a couple times, 2 times on the ground, some good bucks at like 5 yards, 8 yards. Wow. You know, just whip out the phone and start taking video of them and stuff. And then a couple times in a tree, like 10 yards, 20 yards. One pretty far shot that I wouldn't technically call a pass, but that you still got that experience. And I always ask myself, like, all right, how do I feel right now? Like, am I satisfied watching this deer? If I shoot this deer, am I going to feel more regret that I shot it, or am I going to feel regret if I didn't? And I think I've just gotten to the point where I don't really care if, like, someone says, oh, Jacob didn't even kill a buck this year. Like, I honestly couldn't care less about that. And I care a lot less about, like, the destination and more that I get to partake in this chase with what I'm going after. And I just think that that question is always an easy answer for me now. And
Mm-hmm.
the moment it becomes challenging to answer, I'll know that I won't regret it if I take that deer. But
Right.
where it would have been impossible for me to turn down that shot in the past, it's been a lot easier this year.
Yeah. I was talking to a buddy of mine just about exactly this, and just, we were messaging back and forth, and, have a specific goal this year, and it's a challenging one. And I kind of went into it knowing that, I feel good about, how much I kind of know. And, I wouldn't be chasing the goal if I didn't think I had a possibility of attaining it. We'll put it that way. Right.
Yeah.
What the odds are, like, I don't know. Are they 50-50? Maybe, are they 60-40?
That's pretty damn good odds.
Right. Or like, I'm just saying, are they 60-40 no? Or are they 70-30, 70% no and 30% yeah? Like, maybe, I don't know. Like, I think about it this way, that, there was a guy I had on, I wish I could remember who it was now. Kills giants like consistently. And, and I asked him, when you're chasing a big one, and sometimes it might even be like for 2 or 3 seasons that he's chasing one specific deer, because that's the deer he wants to kill. And, I just, whenever it gets into that grind, like, how do you kind of make it through that? Or how do you,
Sounds like Jake Bush.
It wasn't Jake, but he and I have talked about this too.
Similar,
yeah. But this guy's response, and I actually used it this year, because it's similar, right? It's like, I have this goal and I'm chasing it, and and it's going to be a grind. Like, I've hunted more this year already, like in Pennsylvania, than I hunted all of last year between 2 states. It's like, and it's only the beginning of November, right? He said, every day I don't kill this deer, I know that I'm one day closer to killing him. And I was like, that's such a great perspective to have. Right. And so I walk into every sit thinking that that's the sit. It's going to happen, that I'm going to reach my goals that I had for the year. And if I don't, this is what I was texting with my buddy about, I said, I'm going to do something this year that I've not ever done before. I'm going to attempt to. And on the the positive side of it, I reached the goal in awesome, right? I was like, the worst case scenario is that I don't. I was like, but I have all the lessons that I'll have learned with the amount of time that I've spent trying to reach the goal, right? I was like, so I was like, in my mind, it's a win-win, I was like, and that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah. How many more sits have you put in this year than last year?
Oh, dude. So
let's just say PA.
Yeah. So PA. Oh, shoot. PA. I had 2 sits last year.
Stop killing so many deer so early, Clint.
and then this year, I think I'm on hunt. I think when I go out on Thursday, because I took part of this week off because the weather's going to warm up, and wanted to put in a little bit of wife time, like on Monday, and get some jiu-jitsu in before I leave for a week and a half or so. But I'm at hunt 16 this year.
Yeah. So this is a point I bring up a lot when guys say, like, you're so young, like, you don't have much experience, is you have 8 seasons worth of experience this year so far in PA.
Yeah.
Like, you have 8 of last season's experience. So while you were, quote-unquote, successful last season, you killed a buck in PA, it's like you now have learned 8 times as much by not killing a deer. And and it's funny because, like, I'm young enough where I've gone on a long streak of killing deer. And even in those seasons, I do kill deer, but I scout probably 40 times as much as the average hunter out there, and probably 10 times as much as the average public land hunter out there. And, like, I sit more often, too. I make it a priority in my life. I adjust my work hours so I can do so. So I feel like those seasons where I don't tag out early, I learn more. And I'm in the past, I passed up deer in the early season that ended up being bigger than the one I ended up killing, later in the season towards rut. But this year, it's just been a completely different criteria in general. Like, I passed on several deer that would be my second best buck. And Yeah, I mean, I haven't regretted it at all because it's just a larger investment towards next season. I feel like I'm getting multiple seasons worth of experience, and honestly, if you don't end up killing that deer, it just doesn't really feel like a failure.
Yeah.
Like you could go all season chasing, whatever you're after and not kill them. And, if that was everything to you, was just killing a deer, I mean, you'd go out in one of your best rut funnels within the next week and you'd probably smack a 120, 115, 125, whatever for me, it's a frame on the ears is usually what I'm going for. A frame on the ears or bigger. And so, like, I know that there's several areas I could do that right now. I mean, I passed on one this morning. So it's like, and at the same time, I mean, I even sent you videos of that buck snort, wheezing and grunt and stuff. And that's an awesome experience for me. That's a win, that's growth. And I'm not going to act like I'm this like cool guy for passing on deer or whatever. But I think more so the lesson is that like you can have satisfaction in a season that you don't kill. And what other people, like we talked about on the first podcast we did, comparison's the thief of joy. It's like when you start to compare your season to someone else's is when you really start to rob yourself of all that joy.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%, man. Like I've just been kind of soaking it in, right? Like I've not looked at the amount of time that I've spent in a tree or scouting this year. And like, cause I started, this area that I've been hunting, like it hunts tough in the early part of the year. Like they don't bed super consistently and stuff like that. So, early October and middle of October is a challenge just in general, even running trail cameras and stuff like that. Like I've seen that over multiple years of running trail cameras. Like it hunts tough that time of year. But I was bound to determine to like put my time in there and learn, and take my licks, if you will, and just spend a lot of time, with boots on the ground, cause this time of year, we're probably similar in this way. It's like, I'll still get down if I feel like I'm not in the right area and scout like this time of year, even though you should be in a tree like midday, I get it. But if my spidey senses are telling me I'm not in the right spot and I need to move and I need to kind of go look, then I will, it's like, I don't have a problem doing that. But in that earlier part of October, what I loved about it, was I would sit the morning, and I basically chased all weather dates. Like I didn't hunt days that it was going to be super warm or whatever. I kind of like what you're saying, like I adjusted my work schedule where I was in the trailer and I was working in the middle of the day if I had to, hunting in the morning, hunting in the evenings and that type of thing. And then days where I didn't have to work in the middle of the day, if I could move some stuff around or whatever, then I would hunt the morning and I would get down and I would basically get down at like 9:30, 10 o'clock and I would just start walking, and start scouting and put on 5 or 7 miles of covering territory that I hadn't maybe overlooked in my off-season scouting, or maybe I just had never had time to make it to that spot or whatever the case was, and it just, so much of that was worth the time being there, knowing that maybe it's not the right time to be there, but like I wouldn't trade that time for anything.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I feel like I've learned so much from those times that you get down early. Like today, I mean, I didn't get down early per se. I planned on sitting all day. But I had some editing and stuff to do that kind of hit me while I was in the stand. I was like, man, it would suck to be editing right now. And then I was like, oh wait,
I have to.
A lot of that. That's me. and I was like, you know what? Like, that's the other thing too. I think some growth this season is like, taking care of like the family, taking care of the fiance for me, and making sure I spend quality time there. Not viewing that as like I'm making this sacrifice, but like viewing it as a blessing that I have something that I can go enjoy, and that is going to last me longer than hunting will. Like,
yes.
I'll probably not hunt until my last breath unless I have my last breath while hunting, and at this rate, that's very possible. But
right.
like, I have a lot to be thankful for outside of hunting, and I've been able to make some sacrifices this year. I think that's where a lot of my growth has been. But getting down to do something you don't necessarily want to do more than hunting is still a gift. Like we have these things in life that encourage us to grow and be better men, and that's part of it. Is giving up maybe what you want most for what's right. And that's what it's been like the last couple days for me. And I view that as another win this season, but I got down to do that editing, but I basically scouted my way out. It's gonna be a huge rainstorm tonight. It's not really, I don't really believe it's gonna completely wash away the scent, but it is gonna be kind of a downpour for 4 hours straight. So as close as we can kind of get.
Right.
And I know that I observed some really interesting behavior of a doe mounting its fawn. It was really weird, but it's like, and then it was being really skittish. It had to cross a terrain feature and kind of skirted away from its fawn. Like, I think the doe is getting really skittish. And something I noticed, and this is totally weird. I mean, I think I'm weird for thinking this, but my dog, before she got spayed, when she went into heat before she got spayed, used to like hump my little brother when he was really, really young. And so, like, that's like a thing that, well, that's like a thing that
Right.
dogs like exhibit, So I was like,
Yeah.
man, that's interesting. And she's like kind of, she would she was hopping a creek. And so she would go like way down the creek 100 yards and she would race back to the crossing and hop over it. And her fawn would be like, what the heck, mom? Like, so I think she's getting like skittish. And then this morning, Buck comes in, snort wheezing, tearing up a bunch of trees. He got his ass kicked like a minute earlier. And so he got pushed way back. And so I have a theory that was coming into heat. Well, I kind of tracked the trail that she came out on in that observation set, and I found just tore up sign in a telltale area that a big buck had been staying about 2 days earlier, which is right around the time that doe was starting to get going. And the doe's gone now, so I'm assuming that buck either was the one that kicked the smaller one's ass this morning or took that doe off somewhere that I'm not at right now. And he's with her now, locked down. But I wouldn't learn any of that if I didn't get down and scout my way out. I could have been 30 yards off that X, but it might as well be a mile,
Right.
And,
Yeah.
and that 30 yards is going to make all the difference in the world.
Yeah. That's the thing about, this time of year, man, is that it's magical. We all love it, and some of us, it's maybe not our favorite time. But we all love the rut because it's that time of year that, if you haven't filled your tag, anything can absolutely happen. Right. And then, but the flip side of it is too, just like you said, man, when you're not on that X, if you're 40 yards or 50 yards off the X, like you might as well be a mile. Like, you're either in it during the rut or like you ain't even close and you ain't seeing a deer. It's one of those things where the rut, you go out with all this anticipation of, man, it's going to be mayhem, especially if you're doing like a travel hunt, right? And you're going somewhere like Iowa or Kansas, or you're going to, Missouri, or, wherever you pick a destination state, Ohio, wherever, right? That has big deer, and you think, I'm going to get there for the rut and it's just going to be bananas. And then you sit 3 days and don't think a deer has ever lived there. Like that happens, man, and some people get really discouraged by that. And that to me is like one of those things where it's like what you were talking about, where sometimes, you got to give up like an afternoon or whatever and try to figure out like where the hot action is. And it's not even necessarily like, once you get past like what's today, like the 4th, like after this, like to me, it's like scrapes start to not matter a whole lot because it's like they're not getting tended any longer, right? And so like that sign could be a week old. If you're in an area that, one of the areas I hunt, like it's colder, and so the leaves have already been down, for the most part. So it's like, even if the scrape looks open, like it's probably not open, right? There's just no more leaves to come down to cover it, and so it becomes a little trickier to figure out like where the hot stuff is. And it's that observation stuff that you're kind of talking about. It's like, if you see some does, do they have their fawns with them? Do they not have their fawns with them? Is it a single doe where there's usually does together, right? Like, and so it's just paying attention to those small little things, will tell you a lot about either what's happening or what's about to happen.
Yeah, some kind of odd this year that I've been using a lot more unintentionally at first. Feeling a little bit like Johnny Stewart, but using my nose actually. Like, there were times earlier this year I was hunting with my fiance, and it's some of the first time she's ever hunted with me, and we were sitting in areas that magical time that we like the 16th, 17th, 18th of October. They're not does popping quite yet, but there's bucks checking on the doe groups, checking to see if they're around. And we went to a doe bedding area, and we sat downwind of it. more so to just clock a doe or something like that, but we ended up having fog that made it like 9 yards as max visibility. So we're sitting in this stand and we finally get a little bit of day breeze, and it just smelled like a cattle pasture. Like it smelled like just not doe and heat, but like just doe bedding through and through. And she actually commented on it. She's like, "What's that smell?" And I'm like, "That's doe bedding. Like that's what I've been telling you about." And so, being able, I mean, last year, right before I killed my buck, found a doe and heat bed, picked up some of the grass, smelled pure estrus. Doesn't smell at all like Tinks, I'll tell you that much. But it's not as disgusting. Yeah, it's not as disgusting as like you'd think. It's kind of like you smell it and you're like, oh yeah, that's a pungent pee right there. Like that's like there's something going on there that's not just pee. Like that's not a dehydrated deer. That's a doe and heat. And tarsal smells even different. But
yeah.
So I picked it up and I basically tracked that doe back. I was like, all right, she's got to be bedded somewhere between me and this wall of cover. I can't get further back. And, Buck ended up coming out with her leading him and shot him. And I honestly noticed that using my own nose, like, was a lot easier in the pre-rut. Like, it was obvious when I was going past doe bedding with a doe and heat, like, in late October. And it was obvious when a scrape had recently been worked because it's just, like, torn up, especially when you get in like marshes and the grass is elevated and the wind catches it really nicely. It's not just soaked into the ground. Like, it's super obvious. And now that it's like lockdown, I'm not smelling scent like everywhere. I feel like the deer have found the deer they want to be with, whether it's a doe courted by a big buck or a big buck taking a doe away or something like that. I feel like the aggressive sign and stuff I've been finding is immature bucks pissed off because they're not the ones with the doe right now.
Yeah.
And so it's a really interesting thing that I've kind of picked up on a little bit this season.
Yeah, man. There's no mistaking that either smell. Like I said, I'll say it. I'll say it that way, right? Like like when you catch a whiff of a rutted up buck, like you're sitting, in your tree, and all of a sudden, like the wind kind of swirls, and you're like, and it hits you, and you're like, ooh. Like there's nothing mistake. It's like that when you're elk hunting too. It's like you're walking along, you're just be like elk were just here. It smells like a barn right here. There was a bull that my buddy and I were chasing, and we had him chuckling. And a lot of times when they chuckle, they'll pee. Like, they'll pee all over themselves when they're chuckling. And so we were trying to cut the distance on this bull, and we got to where we thought he was at when he was chuckling, and he was just a little bit ahead of us. He got down in this drainage. We didn't end up killing him, but like we got to where he was chuckling, and we stopped both on a dime. At the same time, we looked at each other and we're like, "You smell that?" It's like, this is where he was. Like, it was clear, like he had just been there, Yeah. And so, it's funny. My wife, she doesn't hunt, and so when I tell her, I'll be like, "Yeah, I smelled this rutted up buck," she's like, "You can't smell that." Like, she's like, "What are you, like a wolf or something?" She thinks I'm full of it, And I'm like, no, I was like, you can smell it. Like whenever there's a rutted up buck that's getting close, if the wind is right, I was like, you can usually
random draft.
Yeah. I was like, you can usually catch him. It's like, I've smelled them before they've got to me before, and knew that they were, on their way. But yeah, man, this is a great time of year. But we're going to jump into some more rut stuff, man. But you had an early season hunt that you went on too, right? You were in Nebraska, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, I was.
Yeah, because we haven't talked about that. How was Nebraska?
Dude, it was really awesome. I wasn't able to go back to the exact spot that I was on a bunch of bucks last year, so I kind of started fresh. And
first, was it nice and cool for you?
No, it was much better than last year, I'll say. We had one night that it got down to, what was it? I think it was like 54 degrees or 57 degrees at night and 94 during the day. 47 at night and 94 during the day. So it literally halved its temperature. And I was sleeping in the back of my truck with just a blanket. So like, good thing I had that Osseo like jacket on and stuff, and like the mid-season stuff, and like actually kept me warm at night. But we had some really hot days, some cool days. It was a good mixture, honestly. But Nebraska was awesome this year, man. I did a lot of spot and stalk hunting. I put a couple of videos out on my channel about it, but my first hunt that I went there, basically I took a scout day, saw bucks at like 1.5, 2 miles away, coming from a hayfield. And I could only pick out, like I only saw them for a second, but I only could pick out a tree that they went by. So the next morning I walked 3.1 miles in to try to get to that tree, and my wind started blowing into the hayfield. So I backed off of the tree and then watched a shooter walk right next to that tree. So like, didn't get the shooter, busted the stalk, but I was like, all right, like I would have tagged out right there. You know, like that would have been great. So the next day, adjusted, got a better observation of that hayfield, and spotted a giant, watched him disappear behind a hill and not come out from behind it. He bedded with some subordinate bucks, and I went, I was 1.1 miles away from him and self-filmed, like with a tripod and a GoPro, ran all the way up 1.1 miles away, looped around the downwind side, terrain looked completely different, set up a tripod, set up the GoPro, and he wasn't in the ravine I saw him disappear into. And so right when I cleared that ravine, I saw the subordinate buck stand up. And so I put a stalk on the subordinate bucks thinking he adjusted to bed with them. Little did I know I was 25 yards from him, and he was staring right at me. And by the time I crested that hill, I had about 4 minutes to shoot him at like 40 yards, and then closed 15 yards before he even realized I was there. But just a beautiful full velvet 10-point. And then faced some adversity, and my tripod broke, and my spotting scope broke, and a bunch of stuff. Got lent one from a friend. And I ended up going on just an amazing stalk of just this bloodied up, like, freak buck that was, like, shedding his velvet and raking it on camera. Just, like, looked like he had double drop tines. He was, like, drooping velvet from his rack. And I went on this just crazy stalk where I, like, ran up to him. I had my tripod on a hill filming the whole thing, so you can see me, like, stalking up on this buck. You can see me, like, take my boots off and throw him by some bushes. I'm, like, crawling through cactus and stuff. At one point, he started to loop downwind to me, so I made a huge loop and got around him. And I was sitting at 45 yards from him, clipped on, ready for him to stand up. And then just out of the blue, he sprung up and ran at like a 15-degree angle toward me. And my first reaction was, like, take my hand off of my riser and start my GoPro. And he saw me move and stopped. I got to full draw, and right as I settled on his vitals, he started running. And, yeah, my mind was screaming, like, don't shoot, but my body was, like we're already executing this shot. I just sailed one way over his back, like an idiot. You know, I shouldn't have shot at all, but it was just so reactionary. I reviewed that tripod on the hill, and a side-by-side came off the private land and drove on the other side, you know, with him between me and the side-by-side, and jumped him up. And I wouldn't have hit record on my GoPro and I would have just drawn, I would have shot him at 40 yards. And dude, he was a freaking stud. Like I was so jacked up. But I ended up meeting a really amazing guy. His son was in a rollover car accident. His name's Ty Hockett, was his son, and was paralyzed from like the middle of his back down, and permanently in a wheelchair, limited use of his hands, and still finds a way to hunt like every single day. So I'd just gone on this like crazy hunt and was just pissed off and like complaining about like, oh, I walked all the way back here like 2 miles and like I screwed up this hunt and I don't know what I did wrong, and I was all pissed off. And then I see this 65-year-old man standing by my tripod on the hill, and I'm like, oh, he's a bird hunter. I was like, this guy's gonna steal my camera. I flagged him down, and he was wearing a shirt with a kid with a fishing rod in a wheelchair. And so I was like, what's up with the shirt? And we walked back together. I played bird dog for him. And he told me the story. And it was like, wow, like, I just complained about this amazing hunt that I got on that, like, my own 2 legs walked me back 2 miles to do. And I get to walk all the way back, like, with this guy. And his son doesn't even care that, like, he's paralyzed. Like, he finds a way in his own wheelchair to, like, roll out through the mud and go duck hunting and goose hunting and deer hunting and stuff. And like, it was a extremely eye-opening trip. I ended up getting on that buck again later, and I didn't tag out, but it was just like the most like mind-changing, perspective-changing trip I've ever been on. Nice. Just realizing like how much I have to be thankful for, really.
Man, that's sometimes Oh, I'll say not sometimes. That's all the time. The best part, if you can have that, as opposed to a filled tag. I mean, it'd be great to have a filled tag too, but the I think sometimes when we're, especially if you're having adversity, especially like it's hot weather, early part of the season, a couple blown opportunities, whatever the case is, it's real easy to kind of think about all the stuff that went wrong, or, me, for example, all these hunts in, place where it's like I've been seeing deer, but not what I want to see and stuff like that. And you catch yourself sometimes, getting down, or especially during the rut, like we were saying earlier, like you expect all this excitement and all of a sudden you go 3 days and you don't see any deer, right? Like there's guys that are going through that right now, and you're like, and you get mad about it, but I've tried to think about, especially the mornings when I'm tired and I don't want to get up because I'm not a morning person. Like I'll be the first one to admit, it's like, I love bow hunting. I love hunting mornings. It's actually my favorite part of hunts. But I hate waking up early. Like I hate it, I just I don't like it. But I wake up and I usually tell myself this every morning. It's like, I don't, cause sometimes you roll out of bed and be like, man, I got to get up and go do this. And I got to walk back to this spot that's X far away and blah, blah, blah. It's like, and you just start thinking of all like the reasons why you don't want to do it. I mean, you're going to do it. But as soon as I say that, I try to stop myself and say, you get to do X. You get to walk back and do this. You get to climb into the tree. You get to be cold this morning. You get to, right, that, I try to not let it be lost on me that I get to do all those things. It's no different whenever I go train jiu-jitsu. There's some days I don't want to go where it's like, I get to go train. How many people don't have the capability to do that, right, physically? Or whatever, right? Same thing with hunting, like the guy that you're talking about, like the kid that's in the wheelchair. It's like he would love to be able to get to walk 3 miles and screw up a stalk. You know what I mean? It's like, so,
he would kill for that.
Yeah. It's always, I try to do that, especially when things get tough, like to remind myself that I get to do these things, that I don't have to. They are not a burden. They are a blessing, essentially.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I learned this quote. It's I heard it from someone, but they didn't originally create it. But it's, what punishments of God are not also gifts. It's, right. To know suffering is to know something that's positive.
Right.
Like to be able to take the breath that you feel the suffering with is a gift. Like the fact that you know what darkness looks like means you know what light looks like. You cannot have the bad without the good, and you cannot have the good without the bad. And to resent your current situation means you know what it's like for it to be better, and that this is abnormal for it to be bad. Like that's a complete gift, and
right.
And sometimes you get those gut checks and you do your little comparative suffering and you're like, yeah, it could be worse, right? Because I see this other person in this other situation. And that doesn't take away from necessarily like what you're going through, of course. Like what you're going through can still be bad if it's not as bad as someone else's situation. But at the same time, I think it's important for us, and something that I need to get better at, is to sit in those moments of pain and screw up. And, we're very passionate guys, and we're going to get heated up when something goes wrong, because we care so much about these things. But to sit back in that exact moment that you're going through something awful and just realize that, man, I'm so blessed to have even been in this situation where, I have family that supports this. I have a fiance, in my perspective, I have a fiance that supports me going out and doing this as often as I can. Like I have a great job that allows me vacation time to go do this when I want to. I'm not struggling for money where I have to work instead of taking that vacation time because I'm just struggling to make ends meet. Like I get to share this with all of the people listening right now, get to meet amazing people like you, Clint. And that is such a gift, and I think when you truly find that you are thankful and your goal is no longer to kill that deer, and your goal is truthfully to become better, it relieves the pressure of those moments, and you can kind of sit back and smile, and it's a very intentional effort at first, but it does eventually become subconscious, and it's a really beautiful thing when you can let go of the result like that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, you said it really well, man. Like I can't add anything that would make it any better. I think that's the one thing that I've been able to be more intentional about is not putting so much emphasis on the end result and trying to, the other thing I've been telling myself more often is be where my feet are, cause we always want to be somewhere else, right? Cause I'll be in the middle of a hunt, like I'll be in my tree as an example, last week and I'm thinking of where I want to be next, right? Or I'm thinking of how much I like hunting plain states and how like sometimes I wish I were in the plain states because that's really what the type of hunting I've grown to love, right? And I have to remind myself of like, dude, just be where your feet are. Like there's nothing better than where you are right now, right? Like make this the best, And so I've been really focusing on that, and trying to remind myself that, ultimately where I'm at is the place I'm supposed to be and it's the best place for me to be, right? Figuratively, right? It could be I could get down and scout and move, like, right? So like everyone who's listening, It's not like I'm going to just sit there like for the next 3 weeks in one spot and not ever move. It's more of a, a figure of speech in a way of kind of making the best of what you have going on because it's where you're at right now, right? And all you can do is make that the best it can be, right? And so that's the other thing I've been kind of focusing on, man. But so let's turn to the dark side. Let's turn to the rut.
Yeah.
And you and I both are, as you mentioned, goal-oriented people. And this year, we both have goals that we're trying to meet. I sound like I feel like I sound like Kel Sanderson right now. Like
yeah, you do.
with all the goal talk, right? Like, cause that's
right.
Any interview you ever hear with him about Penn State wrestling is always like, some kids met their goals, some kids didn't. We're just here to try to help them all meet their goals. Like that's what he's all about.
I love the Tom Brands talk where Flo is interviewing him. Like, what's the goal? Like, what's going to happen in practice today? He's like, we're going to get better. He's like, well, what drills are you going to do? He's like, guys are just getting better today. And he's just like, he's like, I'm not giving the recipe away, but we're going to grind and we're going to get better. Like and I think that's what we're in right now. We're in that grind.
That's exactly what we're in. And, one of the things a lot of people will talk about, when we were talking about the earlier part of the season or that October timeframe, like one of the reasons, at least why I like that time of year is that, you usually can find if there's a deer you're trying to kill, there's a chance you can, I don't want to say pattern him, right? But you might know a little bit more about what he's doing. He might be a little bit more predictable. He's going to move probably, I know that as they go through the season, they move more and more, but there's like a point, there's a kind of a pivot point where he's going to be a little bit more daylight active, not running crazy, but he's going to start to make a few mistakes. And if you know where he's at, you can capitalize on those few mistakes in the middle of October, right? Especially if you're, a specific deer maybe that you have a lot of knowledge about. But it gets a lot harder when you get to rut, right? Because there's more pressure typically. And then two, they're looking for does. And so, they may not be where they usually always are. And they maybe are a little bit more random, right? And so a lot of time guys, they hunt a specific deer or have specific goals in mind, like the rut is not the time for them. Right. And so, we're going into this time of year with these specific goals in mind and, which are hard to kind of pin down because of the randomness of it. And so if there is a deer that you're chasing, this time of year, how do you think about trying to like get on him and stay on him, knowing that, there's a lot, I don't want to say randomness, but there's a lot of variables that are at play, I guess is maybe a better way to put it, this time of year that could move him from here to there and back again, within a day, 2 days, 3 days, however long, the time frame might be. But he just may not be he may make a lot more mistakes, but you just maybe don't know exactly where and when he's going to make those mistakes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely, that makes sense. So I've learned a lot this season. I will say that there's a lot of really good deer in the area I hunt, and there's a lot of pressure, and that pressure is year round, and then that pressure is times 2 this time of year. And so that changes things in a way that you can't always predict unless you're tracking people on the way in. Even so, like, it's not always easy to see boot tracks in grass. So that's something I'm dealing with for sure, is randomization due to pressure. Just to give examples, I've learned a lot about how upper age class deer act. And around here, that's your 150s plus and your 140s plus usually, depending on the genetics they end up with. And those deer abide by a certain tone. They describe to a T what you've been describing, where maybe they're a little bit more habitual and have their couple day ranges, and then they shift a little bit. And then it starts to get more hectic and they get more random when it comes to later in the year. And if they get around that 5-6 range, sometimes they get somewhat habitual. And usually for me, the approach is, I know what doe groups are around. I know what doe groups they'll shift to. It's usually pretty obvious if a doe in that group is in heat. You'll see the rest of the group break up. You'll smell the sign if there is sign to be smelled, like if there's a bed or something like that. You'll see just, okay, 100 yards this way, there's no sign. 100 yards this way, it looks like there was a circus of buck rubs and scrapes and stuff like that. And obviously, it's pretty obvious to tell, you start seeing fawns alone, things like that, when a doe is coming to heat. And that's without the use of cell cameras and trail cameras, which make it 10 times easier. So usually that's my approach. But now there's 1 to 2 bucks usually in this area of the state that I would call extremely special. And those bucks do not look like a 150 or 160. And those bucks, they act very differently. They all the things that you would think of, and the things that you've heard about mature bucks, how the older they get, the more habitual they get, and they get kind of like a hermit and they have their core area, just throw it straight out the window. Because there's so much pressure that if a buck was doing the same thing day to day or abided by a common mentality, everyone in this area is listening to those podcasts and following those tactics, and those bucks die. They don't reach maturity, and it's not because these deer are like, hey, this, Clint said this on a podcast the other day, so I'm not going to do it. It's like the deer that end up living are the ones that are predisposed not to act in a way that other hunters are keying in on. And so a couple of the bucks that I'm after right now have all year long gone from one area and then shifted a mile within a night, 7 nights in a row. And early October, late September, you name it. And now that range is even further expanded in November. And there are really good bucks in the area. There are 140s, there are 150s, and they can leave the same kind of sign. They can have the same track. They can have really large tracks, and they can be super aggressive in their respective areas. And it's hard to just go off of sign in that case. So some guys play the cell camera net game. I'm not one for that, but some guys net out a giant line of cell cameras and they try to surround his area, and they get a picture of him. They start chasing that picture and they run behind his tail by a day every single day of the season. And I'm seeing that a lot with a lot of the competition I'm having in these marshes. For me, the difference is I wanted to go off of his historical data. So I wanted to basically use that in order to predict his shifts. Well, last year, the other buck that competed with him, the other really special deer in this area, got killed. And those 2 bucks would butt heads every now and then. And the one that's alive still would usually beat him out, but wouldn't want to fight with him if it came down to it. Now that buck's dead, and his core areas were fantastic, and they were very conducive to staying away from people. And the core areas that this past buck, this one I'm chasing now, was in, he's no longer really using. So he's shifted quite a bit to adopt different ranges that were previously high competition for him. And there's more people after him than ever. At the beginning of the season, I'll just say it, like, when I say specific goals, in my case, I'm chasing a specific deer. And I don't want to admit that, but I'll say it for the benefit of the audience here. But at the beginning of the season, there was 14 people hunting them. Several of them have tagged out on lesser deer. being great deer still, but not him. And we're getting down to less competition, but that competition has completely changed his range. And so right now it's very, very difficult for me to kind of predict where he's at, being that I'm not getting pictures of him on cell camera. I'm not going and blanketing out SD cams or cell cameras. I'm going majorly off sign. So for me personally, on this specific buck in this specific situation, it's a combination of observation sits and like what we talked about, getting down after a morning and doing a little bit of scouting. And some of the pieces of those puzzle have been big tracks. Some of them have been figuring out a doe before she's coming into heat or when she's about to come into heat, and hoping that the buck that finds her first is him as the first mature buck and maybe not one of those nicer bucks, of a good class. Despite, maybe I would shoot them now at this point in the year. But laying eyes on him next, maybe from a distance, is going to be kind of my goal here. And as we get closer to gun season in my last few days of hunting, which are coming up very, very quickly, I'll start to, maybe agree to shooting one of those upper age class bucks and just gaining intel on him for another year and maybe being able to chase him next year. So, it's very difficult to give that advice to someone else, knowing that this buck is in a really unique situation. He's been pressured by many people. He's predisposed to not do the same thing day to day and moves very far, which is also conducive to a lot of people knowing about him because a lot of people get him on cameras. There's cameras everywhere. But sometimes it's just about like getting creative, seeing if you can observe him, seeing if you can line up a specific type of sign to him if he's got a specific track. Like I've noticed that some of these bucks that when we killed them out in these marshes, I don't know if it's like surviving EHD or something, but their hooves are completely like broken. Like their pads and stuff are worn out. Clint, one second. I'll send you a picture of this, but my buddy killed like a 140, 145. And I saw THP post this the other day, and then coincidentally, a couple days later, he ended up killing this deer. And all of its hooves were broken out. And basically, it would be really easy to tell if it was his track. So I was told that that's a characteristic of a deer that survived DHD, which we had severe droughts last year. And he grew some funky stuff on his rack, and the deer I'm chasing has some funky stuff on his rack. And there's only about 100 of those deer in the marsh, but you combine a big track with a broken up pattern, and that might be, what I'm looking for in his track. But now I need to align, maybe his travel, his previous ranges, maybe where he wants to be now, most recent intel, maybe a visual of him, and now his track. And now I'm starting to build the pieces together so I can use his sign and his track maybe a little bit better than I previously was. That being said, all that explanation, it's a very hard thing to do. But,
right. What I wanted to ask, though, is like, even when you find sign, how confident are you that it's potentially huntable given just the nature of the time of year that we're in, right? Because that deer, because there's been studies done, right, where it's like the bucks actually bed more consistently during the rut than they do in the earlier parts of the year, right? Now, I take that with a grain of salt because a lot of times the studies that had been done, those deer weren't 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. They're typically like a 3
in the way that we see,
right. They're typically like maybe a 3.5-year-old or whatever the case is, right? Like they're still doing deer things, and mature deer do deer things too. But to your point, they usually, especially the special ones that hit a certain age class, they just don't act like the other deer do, right? There's a reason why they, there's a reason why they got to 5 to 7 years old. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't because they did what all the other deer do. Otherwise they'd be dead like all the other deer.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree with you there. As far as like hunting the sign, usually when I see the sign, in most cases, I sent you a picture of those tracks.
Yeah, it just came through, so I'm looking at it. That's wild, dude.
I know, right? It's crazy. For people that can't obviously visualize this right now. Imagine if you took a hammer to the toes of a deer and you just kind of cracked off the tip of his hooves.
Yeah, or
That's
imagine imagine like your 90-year-old grandma took her socks off and asked you to rub her feet. Looks like those toenails.
Yeah,
like
exactly. They're broken up. It's weird. It looks like it would be painful to survive a winter on that.
Yeah.
So I mean, that would be really cool. I mean, the track is something I want to associate back to the sign. I will say when I see any sign, because I know a deer that is a 120 or better could make a lot of that sign, like a 120 can make, depending on his width and whatever, right? Like he can rub a dang telephone pole if he wanted to at times, and they're powerful animals. They can gouge stuff up, they can twist branches off, they tilt their rack sideways, they can reach pretty dang high. There's not necessarily a figure of this deer that is going to separate its type of sign away from another deer's. Now, if you consider kickers on a specific brow tine or something like that, now you can start to maybe pick it apart a little bit more.
It's like when they start to get like very noticeable antler characteristics.
Yes.
It starts to give you a lot.
That'll give them away a bit.
Yeah, it's like a thumbprint. You know what I mean? It's like you can look at a tree. It's like, cool, they've got split brows. It's like, okay, cool. If they're raking a tree, and you see something that looks like a cheese grater hit it, probably the deer with the split brows, stuff like, for sure.
To me, that's like a line of defense for me is quantifying that the sign says. Usually, like I said, when I see sign, I assume it's a little bit late. Obviously, you can look at when did the leaves drop, or sometimes it's little tamarack, like pieces of tamarack, basically. You can see when the little needles dropped, and you can tell if they're raining right now, if they were raining, if there's bark on the ground, is the tree still bleeding, things like that. Like you can do all that. Is it green? Is it faded? You can do all that, and that will work for general sign. But rubs are in rare cases going to tell you the individual deer. Very rare cases, like this deer, it did, but it's very rare. So what I would really like to do is identify his individual track. And then like when I do get him on cell camera, or I do get him on a camera, I want to be there the next day, not only to hunt it, but more importantly to find his track, see what it looks like, and see if I can associate that track back to his sign later. So if I come across that track when I'm cruising around the edge of a bedding area, or maybe getting into one, I'll know if he went in there. And there's been many times this year, one of the things that I've grown on is literally tracking bucks into their beds, stopping. And every time I've done that, every time I found a track that I deem fresh, followed it back into a bedding area, stopped at the right time, I've watched the buck come out of that bedding area. It has yet to be him, but it's always been a nice deer, So that gives me confidence if I can figure out his sign and his track that I could do that if I came across it. A sighting is obviously going to be paramount, but usually, like, because of the sign that some of the other mature bucks in this area can make, it's not going to be extremely differentiated from what he's also capable of making. And I do think that this deer, in very rare scenarios, actually leaves sign. And I think that that's another reason that he's alive still. Is you think about the trail that you leave behind when you leave just a blazed amount of scrapes and rubs and stuff. Every hunter in the woods knows how to see a telephone pole rub, and
right.
And I've gotten into some different terrain that I just didn't think it was possible for deer to be in, and that's where I've actually found some of his sign. But before, I literally just didn't think this deer made sign at all. Every time you would see him, you wouldn't see any like sinew in his bases or anything like that. Like he just wasn't like rubbing up stuff, or sometimes you would, and it would be like, where would that be? Like there's not a rub in here that's got any characteristic of him within a mile, and because of this deer, he could have covered that mile in a night. So my goal, like currently, is either get on a track and associate that to him, get an observation of him and learn things about him through that, or get on the doe that's going to pop into heat and be ahead of him when he comes into that area to get that doe.
Right. Man, it's funny that you mentioned it earlier. We were talking about goals, and you were like, you're hunting a specific deer. I've not stated it necessarily, but like I'm doing the same thing, which is why I'm not in Missouri. There's a deer that I really wanted to chase this year, and I don't do it very often. I'm usually more of a opportunist, right? Like whatever couple good bucks that I see that, I'm happy to kill any of them, type of situation. But this year was one of those years where I was like, you know what, I'm going to go all in on this particular deer and going to skip, headed out to the Midwest to try to do so. But when you said, not finding a lot of sign, dude, that rings so true. Like for me, because that's been one of the biggest struggles is doing a lot of walking and, it's like he doesn't make any, like I've yet to find, I may have come across a rub somewhere that was his, but there's nothing, and he has some antler characteristics that would suggest that like I should be able to tell if it's his.
Right.
But it's also one of those things like where maybe he's just not super aggressive and maybe he's not using that part of his antlers to make the rub. You know what I mean? It's like, and so maybe it is his and maybe it just doesn't look like I think it should. You know what I mean? One of those types of things, right? Because you do all the stuff like where it's like, I'm looking for that distinction of like the antler characteristics that he has that would make something distinguishable. I'm also looking at like the height, right? But that can be deceiving because like big bucks will rub low, just like, smaller bucks will rub higher. Not as often, but if it's a nice 120-inch deer, like you were saying earlier, like they can make some decent sized rubs that'll fool you, it's like I'm not finding anything, that I can kind of tie back to him definitively. I've not cut a track. It's a lot of like similar stuff that you were kind of talking about. It's a lot of grass like around the area and stuff like that to where it's just like, I'm checking like every freaking scrape I see, like cause that's really one of the few spots where it's like, I'll have bare dirt that I can find a track, you know what I mean? So I'm checking like every scrape that I see to see if like, there's like, I really don't even care so much about the scrape as I do about there being bare dirt and see if I can see a track in it, and, yeah, it's just one of those things, man. Like these deer, like you were saying, like I just really think that they don't, I think when they get to this particular age class, one, they don't have a lot of competition, at least where I live, this type of deer. And so I don't think they feel the need to compete because they don't really have any true superiority or dominance competition unless there's a bully buck somewhere in the area that just doesn't care, so I don't think they throw down a ton of sign, or I don't think he does, and which is also probably why he's lived so long, right? Because like it's hard to figure out exactly where he's at.
Yeah, I completely agree with all that, and I think a lot of these deer survive, like I said, because they're predisposed to act a certain way. I don't think that. I think we overthink stuff a lot as a hunter, and like you hear guys all the time. It doesn't drive me nuts, but it kind of bothers me when people are like, "Yeah, these deer know that trees mean hunters," and it's like, or maybe this deer lived in an area without trees and now he's old.
Right? Yeah.
I don't think the deer are doing the.
No, you and I think the same. You and I think the same. There, it's like, look, they're very intuitive. Is what they are. Yeah. Like they're very aware of their surroundings and when things are slightly amiss, like they're just keyed into it. No different than any of us would be if we walked into our living room and the lamp was moved. You know what I mean? It's the same. I feel like it's the same. It's the same thing. They have a certain trait about them that they have lived a certain way, and that way of living has been the reason why they've stayed alive. Like that's, to me, that's like.
Well, and I think that's why you have guys like kill a mature buck and they're like, wow, this buck wasn't that smart, or this buck was just a hermit. It's like you found the thing that deer wasn't getting killed by, and you executed on it. And one thing I want to touch on with rubs too is like I've learned this a lot from Greg and different studies and seeing. I had a really enlightening moment when I watched a net booner 12-point make a rub, and it was 2 inches high and barely tapped the tree, and this thing I could have pushed over with a pinky, and he just enough to get his glands on it and right back off of it. And so like I think it's much easier. I think it's almost impossible to write off a rub as an immature deer, but I did not believe that at first at all. You couldn't convince me that was true even 2 years ago. But I think it's much harder to tell yourself that is not a mature deer than it is, just from the rub alone. If you look at the intelligence of the rub, why it's there, stuff like that, then maybe you can get some insight into it. But if you look at a rub, I think it's easier for you to say this could not have been made by an immature deer. I think it's much easier to say that has to have been a mature buck because it has X characteristics. The tracks are deep. It's extremely high. The average of the rub is high. Max height of the rub is high. I think deer are powerful animals, so I think all of them can dig in pretty well, but we all know what a really aggressive rub looks like. It's hitting trees way behind. I think it's easier to find a rub that certainly was made by a mature buck. So, I mean, that's the thing for me is like it's getting harder to rule out that. I mean, a mature buck can be a 140, 150, and it can still not be the buck I'm after. So like there can be some banger sign that is not characteristic of a specific buck. But if you look at the whys and the hows, you can kind of figure out if I understand this deer and what he's doing, and maybe I don't have all those puzzle pieces right now, but maybe with some more experience with this deer, if I understand him, I can start to associate like, okay, this is him. Like it makes sense. Like you hear Jake Bush with the big 80 killed this year talk about just twisting a branch around in his antlers, and just ripping apart a bush. And other deer in that area were not doing that, and so he actually relocated that deer several times by that telltale sign. So, maybe there's something like that you can key on that's unique to that buck. But in this case, it's like, I haven't found that yet.
Right. Yeah. And let me ask it this way. What are your favorite dates of the rut to hunt? Because I think a lot of dudes, love that. I mean, I love all of it from the last week of October through, right? Like it's just a great time to be in the woods. But I'm curious for you, like, what are your favorite rut dates to, like, if you had to pick just like a handful of dates, like what are your favorite dates?
It's hard for me. It's changing quite a bit as I go through the season here. It depends on the country I'm in, but I will say, no matter what, I love the 24th through the 30th and the 31st. Like I absolutely love those dates. I've had most of my success from October 20th to 27th. Like those are my favorite dates. If you extend the rut even earlier, I really, really love the 17th, 18th, and 19th and 20th a lot. If I had to pick like 2 weeks, and I've yet to like convert to like totally believing in this, but like if I had to pick a time to hunt a specific deer, I would certainly tell you the 16th through the 28th. And if I had time to go out of state, I would probably tell you like the 28th to November 7th or something like that. But that's not screaming from experience. So I would say like a lot of guys do like that second further week in November. Usually I don't have a tag by then, and usually I've already ran out of vacation time by then. So I can't tell you that. I have a lot of experience and absolutely love those dates. But right now I'm dealing with the woes of this first week of November and thinking I probably should have put my vacation in a week earlier or a week later. So you ask me next year, it might be that the first week of November is the best thing in the world. We happened to stick with a 3-day rainstorm, at this point in the year. So a lot of things change.
It's somewhat weather dependent, right? Like, yeah.
And the deer are going to rut no matter what, but like now I'm going after a specific buck and it's like, well, they could be going ham down the hill and I don't care at all about that because I want to be within 20 yards of where he's going to end up. So it's like, I might be shoved back and hearing bucks grunting and chasing 100 yards away like crazy. And I'm like, I don't care about that. It's not him, so it's like, I don't necessarily put myself in position to see a lot of rut action because if they were running wild like that, they would be dead. Like they wouldn't reach the age that I'm chasing. So,
right. Exactly. Yeah. For me, it's dependent, right? Whether I have some flexibility, right? Because I had initially taken my vacation time the first week in November, and I've been chasing this deer, and I've been sleeping in my truck, working from my trailer. Like it's stupid. Like I've slept in the truck so much. Yeah, dude, it's been bad. I've been, working from the trailer and like not showering for days and just like, not going on video when I'm on work calls and shit because I look like a train wreck, it's like, and, yeah. So, but, fortunately it's like we were talking about earlier, man, it's a blessing. I have a job that I can work remote and stuff like that. And I'm pretty flexible with like taking my time off and stuff like that. So, I was looking at the weather because my buddy Chad Sylvester, like he's actually joining me here I think Sunday and gonna hunt with me. And we were supposed to go to Missouri together, and I told him he didn't have to come to PA. Like he could still go to Missouri or do whatever he wanted to do, but he was like, no, dude, he's like, we're gonna hunt together. He's like, I'm come to PA and hunt. So I was like, all right, that's a good friend, man. You know what I mean? Like he skipped the Midwest trip to just come hang out, and hunt a state that a lot of people won't travel to hunt as a destination. So that's a good friend. But I was watching the weather, and so I just kept kind of like keeping an eye on it. And then when I saw that we were going to have like a warm snap in the middle of this week for 2 days and like some rain, I was like, I don't know what next week's going to look like, but I'm going to guess we're not going to have 80-degree temperatures. Hopefully, fingers crossed. I was like, even if it's just like seasonal average temperatures, I was like, it'll be better than what I'm going to get this week. So I actually pushed off my vacation to the second week, which also coincides with like, even though I'm chasing a specific deer this year, it's like I also went back and like looked at a lot of my trail camera data just over the past 3 years that I've run trail cameras on that piece, just in general, and looked at not when did I see the most activity, but when did the bigger deer, the more mature deer in the area show up on camera most often. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I started looking at that, and it was typically the back half of the second week, even into like gun season, like there's still like, daylight active, where some of the bigger ones were when they became most visible and stuff. So I pushed my vacation off to the second week. I would say like overall, I've grown to kind of like the 6th and 7th through like the 14th. Like if I had to pick like a week, just because I feel like that 6 and 7 date like is magical for some reason.
Yeah.
Like, and then the peak breeding date in PA is like the 14th. And so that's why that 6th, 7th is like magical, is because you're a week out from like the breeding happening. So like you really get them starting to cut does out and not necessarily running them like you see like in early November, but like the big boys know that it's time. Like, cause they'll like those big boys.
Yeah, they're running out of does.
Yeah. And they know whenever it's time to get down to business, you know what I mean? It's why like all of a sudden you start to see them make some mistakes because they can cut does out in some secluded areas, you know what I mean? Maybe don't have to travel as far. You get into that second week in November, and now all of a sudden some of the does have been bred middle of October because you had some early does. You had a bunch get bred right at the end of October, the very beginning of November. And now, there's a few stragglers that are still in that first cycle before you get into like that next like December cycle that you'll have, right, of the quote unquote second rut, and so I've just kind of grown to like that time frame because I just feel like I've seen more like quality animals make mistakes and get visible, and they're typically not running because they're not chasing a doe, like they're seeking again, like they're trying to find, so they're covering ground.
Yeah no, I love that. I mean, I will say like, well, I'm usually tagged out before this time of year. Last year, and I've changed terrains like even in college, like when I was out in southwestern Wisconsin in hill country, bluff country, like I had properties sell. I had them get completely logged out. I wasn't able to hunt the same property year to year except for 1 year. And so, that's a lot of change. And I'm hunting multiple properties, right? But like so many of them are going in and out that I haven't been able to repeat and regain that knowledge. And so it's been the preseason intel of fawn drop dates that has got me on to the right dates. And I usually end up executing on that early because you usually get on the first fawn. It takes a couple cycles of that to kill, and by then you're not into the peak of rut. And then you go off of whatever your trail cameras see. So then last year I come out to the marshes in southeastern Wisconsin for the first year and spread a wide net and stuff. Went after a couple specific bucks, ended up getting one on November 10th, but all the way from the 31st or 30th to the 7th, I was in Ohio. So, I most of my learning is not done by trail cameras, it's done during the hunts, the stalk in, the scout out, all the stuff we've been talking about that actually kills the mature deer that a lot of guys sit back on their cameras, and that's why the mature deer live, like that's the stuff that you actually learn that information, and maybe use it to improve your camera approach and learn more intel through them as well. And so not only did I not have that in-person experience that's so valuable during that time of year, I actually had I think it was 6 of my cameras get stolen. 4 of them were ripped off of cable locks, a couple sticks high onto the tree. Just a bunch of crap, and so like I had a bit of cell camera intel. I had like 2 SD cams of intel. And so, I couldn't even go back and really check much, so this year pressure changed a lot of extra pressure. So it's shifting how the deer are behaving this time of year in the spots I'm familiar with. So I won't know till next year what dates I like even more. I'm still in it right now, it's only the 4th. Yeah. But what I can't get away from is just like, as a guy that busts his ass and finds out where that sign is going to be made and is routinely there before the sign is made, and finds out when those phones are dropping, finds out when the does are going into heat, when the early ones are, because that's like the real chaos that every deer wants to be on until, the mature one scoops her up. Like, I love that time of year so much. That mid-October to late October is just like, if you were the guy that put in the work, there's less hunters in the woods. How you've talked about your later weeks of November, really, like people have started to phase back out of the woods and stuff. It's like that, but it's more virgin, and so
yeah,
I just love it because I've done the work to get ahead of the other people, and they're not out yet, and I usually just don't have the tag, but I've chosen to pass on the deer this year, so I still have the tag.
Yeah, that's the same reason why I love that time of year. But that's also why I looked at, you're 100% right, why I was looking at whenever I was planning things out and, things didn't come to fruition in the beginning part of the year with this particular deer. I started, before I even knew the weather, I was in the back of my mind kind of fingers crossed, like, man, I hope the weather's bad the first week in November. I was like,
right. Well, it is for me, but
yeah. And not for. I mean, it sucks. I don't like it for you, but for me, where I was hunting, I was like, I know a lot of guys are going to be taking that last week in October and that first week in November off. I know it, right? Yeah. A lot of guys, I won't say a lot. There's not as many that take that second week off, right? It's not as popular of a date because a lot of guys feel like that, like, they want that snap and the deer running like from the 31st to like the 4th, right? Like they want the fury of the flurry of action, right? And which is cool. Like that's all fun, and good. But I was kind of really hoping the weather wasn't going to be great because I was like, I want this next week to be good and there to be fewer people because fewer people want to hunt like the 11th through the 18th. I was like, but that's actually when I really want to hunt, I mean, like for this particular area,
right.
If I can't, if I couldn't get it done in October, that was whenever I was kind of hoping things would work out. And the other part too is, man, is like sometimes a deer has like a personality or like a way about him that, he's only going to give you a chance to kill him at a certain time of year. And that's all you're going to get. You know what I mean?
Oh, for sure.
Whether it's early, some of them will give you the chance early season for whatever reason. Some of them will give it to you during the rut. Some of them won't give it to you till late season, whatever the case is. You just have to be kind of ready to go when they're ready to meet you halfway to a degree. Cause so much of it's like we do all of our work, as much work as we could possibly do. And there's still an element of luck that plays into it too.
100%. Yeah. I met several really fantastic hunters this year, but one that has really shocked me, and he's just incredibly humble, has selected to not be part of the industry in any way, shape, or form, which, given his record, could be one of the biggest guys out there. Right. And, he's getting it done in the most pressured areas and the most impressive deer I've ever seen. And he's very upfront about luck being involved. And he's very understanding of when someone's BSing it, saying they have it all figured out. And he's just a guy that I could talk to for hours if I got the opportunity, and would just consume information and just listen to, because, man, such a wealth of knowledge. But to your point, like, it sounds like you're doing the thing where, like, hey, this deer has got a flaw in his game, and it's this timing that I have figured out that this deer is making himself vulnerable. And he's lived this long, right? He's probably going to live that long again. You know, as much as so many people could be after him, right? He's probably going to live again. You know, and that's probably the situation I'm in too. And you're letting that deer tell you how it's going to get killed. And it's the way, like we've been talking about all podcasts, that other people aren't targeting it. Yeah. And there is something to be said about, if you understand, and we talked a bit before, and it sounds like you do, if you understand how other people are pressuring that deer, and they're giving up their cards, and they're setting up their cell cams, and now you've seen where all the deer have been pushed out because you've been observing all season. Like, now you know this deer is in a more focused area. You know that he's going to be weakened by the rut a little bit. Maybe he's got to associate with some food, some water, more than usual, and stuff like that. Like, there's a whole new set of weaknesses that deer might have if he makes it past that first flurry of the rut. And just as it's easy to find that doe, not easy, but like just as easy as finding that doe that first comes into heat, you might be able to find that doe that last comes into heat. And that might be an even more golden ticket than the first one. And then you got the factor of fawns. Obviously, no one's got the early drop fawn figured out that's going to pop into estrus, but you still stand the opportunity to do that in kind of a second rut type situation. Yeah. And the biggest flurry of sign I saw on camera the entire year was December 20th in Wisconsin last year. Was just an insane secondary rut. I've never had so many different mature bucks on one singular camera. It was insane. And I literally I lost the SD card to that, but I wrote a reminder on my phone before I lost that SD card, actually when I was in Nebraska. I wrote a reminder on my phone to hunt this spot and bring rattling antlers on December 20th. So much so, you know, like, so I think what you're doing is, like, it's very strategic in a way that a lot of guys would be like, oh, I got to get it done. Like, I'm in that same situation where I'm like, I'm sweating here. Like, I'm getting nervous. I got to get it done before this time period. Where, like, I've been collecting this data. I've been watching how this deer is vulnerable. And now you're also gaining information for other people. I think you're, like, setting yourself up for a really good opportunity to strike at them.
Yeah. Hopefully, man. Fingers crossed. Yeah. We'll see. You know, we'll see if Lady Luck shines on me this year. You know, it's like if I you know, did what I did last year, and if I meet my goals this year, I might just retire at that point. You know.
Yeah, I was telling my fiance this year, I was like, I have set myself for a big old strike and a miss this year, just because of how last year went. But now, like we talked about at the beginning, like, my perspective on what a swing and a miss is completely
that's it,
changed.
Dude. Yeah, man. Like, it's, you know, like I said earlier, that's why at the beginning, you know, I was talking to my buddy Jake Hofer, is who I was actually talking to from Exodus. He and I were texting back and forth, and I was just asking him what he was chasing, and he's got some good deer that he's chasing out of his place in Illinois. And he knew what my plans were for the year, and he was asking me how things were going. We were just kind of chatting, you know, and he knows about the area that we've talked about where I'm hunting and stuff like that. And he's like, you know, he's like, that's a specific deer in that area. He's like, that's a tall task. Like, you know, that's like not for the faint of heart, you know? And then my response was, I was like, yeah, you know, I feel like last year I was real fortunate to have the season I had, and that, you know, with that, I felt like I should take that, you know, and approach this year, like, with the idea of, like, getting better. And, you know, and talking to my buddy Nathan Killen, like, you know, we've talked, you know, like on the podcast, and we've talked off the podcast, and he's like, there's nothing that'll make you better than trying to chase, like, a specific mature deer in a place that's hard to hunt. You know, he was like, it'll humble you, and it will teach you things that it will take you years to learn. He's like, if you let a deer, like an older mature deer, teach you, they're the best teacher you can possibly have. You know, and so I was just like, you know what? Had a great year last year. I feel like I'm playing with house money. I'm going to go for broke, you know what I mean? And just do something that's going to be hard and know that it's going to be challenging, and just accept the fact that this year might just be a really great learning experience for me, and that's good enough, and so that's where I'm at, Yeah. So with that, dude, I know it's getting late, brother. We jumped on here late because you were supposed to be jumping out of the shower, just trying to scrub some sumac off of you, but I know you just...
I got that off earlier.
Yeah, he got that off earlier. But I know you got a bunch of stuff going on, dude. So before I let you get out of here, let people know where they can catch the stuff that you have going on, the stuff that you've been editing, the reason why you had to come home today.
Yeah, so I have been producing podcasts for the Mobile Hunter podcast. The guys on that, Chris Leppert, Rick Cates, and Josh Luck, just awesome dudes. Clint, I don't know if you had the pleasure of meeting them yet, but they're throwing the Mobile Hunter Expos, and they just great dudes. Very fortunate to take part in their Whitetail Apprentice series, which goes from basic to in-depth on a lot of topics. And then I host my own series called Wild Calling Wednesdays. It's just crazy stories. I actually just finished editing an episode with Johnny and Greg on the same podcast.
Nice.
So it gets a little bit wild on that one. A couple beers involved, but
right.
It is just a deer campfire-esque story kind of thing. So there's some crazy intense stories. There's some fun ones like the Johnny and Greg one. And then I'm making content for my YouTube channel, The Wild Calling, and that's pretty much where you can find me when I'm not in the woods, is behind a computer trying to get that stuff done.
Right. Awesome, brother, man. Well, I hope you meet your goals this year to continue the Cale Sanderson references here. I hope you meet your goals this year and attain all the stuff that you want to. I'll be watching, and I'll look forward to getting a text from you with that grip and grin, brother.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Same to you, Clint. Thank you.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. And if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And hell, while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there too. And before I shut this thing down, we need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Osseo Gear, Tethered, Exodus Outdoor Gear, and Genesee Beer. And until next time, we'll see y'all.